it want to see the blood? Bless its heart, so it shall. Take a good look, my pet. You'll see enough of it if this sort of thing keeps up.
There was the blood.
It had been washed away.
But there was more to come.
The blood had been removed, and so had the writing on the wall.
The case of Mary Jane Kelly, the morning of Friday, the 9th of November. It's the longest gap. 40 days after Catherine Eddowes on Sunday, the 30th of September, 1888.
I'm not through with her yet.
Now, Kelly was younger.
Stay with Eddowes and the writing on the wall.
John what? Had Daniel come to judgment?
It applies. Sir Charles, Officer and Gentleman Warren, Chief Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, was certainly many tickle up housing.
Weighed in the balance and found wanting.
He was too. When Catherine Eddowes' body was found, half her apron was cut off. And a couple of hours later, and a few streets away, they found the missing half.
And the writing on the wall. Was it written in capitals?
We don't know. We don't know whether it was capitals, continental letters, copperplate, or the same handwriting as the Ripper letters. Because Sir Charles comes whistling down from the yard and orders his men to rub it out.
Unforgivable.
But what we do know, because Detective Sergeant House used his eyes, is that that word was spelt J-U-W-E-S.
Still can't see why you or that city police lawyer are so interested. I mean, the Ripper's letters were full of spelling mistakes. I mean, it's the way he handles a knife that matters, not what he does with a piece of chalk.
The reason why that city police lawyer, Crawford, kept on about the spelling is that he spotted what that word could be. And it's got nothing to do with the men who followed Moses. The J-U's are Jubilar, Jubilo, and Jubilum.
Sound like a circus act.
They were the three Masons working on Solomon's temple who murdered the Grand Master Hiram Abiff.
3 Masons, is that your line? Sure you wasn't a Jehovah's Witness?
You may think it's daft, but I have a feeling that Crawford didn't, and neither did Sir Charles Warren. And he was Chief Commissioner, mind, not some fussy local JP. But something made him desperately anxious to get that writing wiped out. And not just covered up or hidden until it could be photographed, but removed.
Was Crawford a Mason?
We don't know, but Warren was.
A big shot?
Yeah, joined in Gibraltar in 1859.
Gibraltar?
Yeah, he was stationed there.
So he joined for social reasons?
Oh, no. Very keen indeed was Sir Charles. Right up the Masonic ladder. Grand Arch in 1861, a Knight Templar 2 years later, and a Grand Elected Knight in 1879. He was an officer of the Grand Lodge as well. 2 years before these murders, he was busy founding the first Quater Coronati Lodge of Masonic Research. And he was a past Grand Sojourner in the Supreme Grand Chapter, whatever that means.
Sounds important.
I believe he wanted, even needed, to wipe out evidence that Jack the Ripper was a Mason too.
Well, they certainly stick together, as we both know from Lancashire.
And they're secretive. Do you know much about the ritual?
No. Oh, except something about rolling up your left trouser leg when you join. Pretty comic.
But secret.
So you don't know anything either?
Found out of it.
How?
I found somebody... See, I'm being secretive. Somebody who's a good Mason, but also a good cop. And with that, and the best part of a bottle of scotch, I got the 3 J's sorted. Jubilar, Jubilo, and Jubilum. The 3 murderers.
And who did they kill?
The Grand Master Hiram Abiff.
Huh?
And Solomon, it was his temple, remember, ordered the other masons to track them down. And they did, and killed them with due ceremony and formal ritual.
Like Edo's?
The abdomen was all exposed. The intestines were drawn out to a large extent and placed over the right shoulder. A piece of the intestines was quite detached from the body and placed between the left arm and the body.
By placed, do you mean put there by design?
Yes.
Would that also apply to the intestines that were over the right shoulder?
Yes.
Placed by design.
Become a master mason and is one of the instructions.
Instructions?
For the murder of the J-U-W-E-S. Let the breast be torn open, and the heart and vitals be taken from thence and thrown over the left shoulder.
Left, not right. Mind you, that's not the only murder where things and... what things were placed and arranged.
You mean...
Yeah. Victim number 2, remember, Dr. Phillips?
I searched the yard, and I found a small piece of coarse muslin and a pocket comb in a paper case, lying at the feet of the woman. They had apparently been placed there in order, or arranged there.
Not the same...
But the words, and he used them again in just your context.
The intestines, severed from their mesenteric attachments, had been lifted out of the body and placed by the shoulder of the corpse.
So it's number 2 and number 4, which is 100%.
2 out of 4?
Well, I mean, number 1, the doctor only looked at to see she was dead. Number 3, there the ripper was interrupted.
Number 5?
Mary Jane Kelly.
It was 11:15 on Friday morning. I said to my man John Bowyer, go to Mary Jane Kelly's room and try and get some rent from her. She was charged 4 shillings a week, but she was 30 shillings in arrears. I'll make it a rule to collect rent from the court daily. But Kelly'd been having a hard time of it lately, so I'd heard. I didn't press her. So I told Bowyer, go to number 13, that was Kelly's room, and see if she's going to give me any money. Well, Bowyer went, but when he knocked on the door, he couldn't get any answer. He looked through the keyhole, but the key was missing. Now, there's 2 windows that face the court on the left-hand side of the room. One of them was broken when Kelly had a row with a man she said was her husband. And the hole had been stopped with a man's old coat behind a muslin curtain. Bowyer put his hand through the hole and drew the curtain and the coat aside. Now, he's been a soldier for 20 years and seen service in India, but I'll tell you himself, he nearly fainted at the horrible sight that met his eyes. The woman was lying a naked, bloody mess on the bed. She'd been mutilated out of all recognition.
Well, I was that scared when I saw what I saw that when our good keeping needs from not getting together, I run round to the governor here and told him something dreadful had happened at number 13. But how anybody could have had the audacity to commit such a crime there of all places, fair knocked me all of a heap. Why, that there court's nothing but a trap. There's only one entrance to it from the street, as you've seen, sir. And that's as narrow as the opening to a sentry box.
Dorset Street's never deserted either, day and night. When the public's closed, the lodging houses begin to get busy. And that big one over the way kept by Crossenham's open all night. And it exactly faced the entrance to my court. But no one saw any strange man come down or go out of it. When Bowyer come running to me, all scared and trembling, I went to number 13 and put my head through the broken window. I haven't broken my fast since then. The sight I saw made me sick. And it'll be a good many years before I forget it.
It's Mary Jane Kelly, 25 and dead. When she was alive.
Depends how much you believe Joseph Barnett, the man she'd been living with, or the stories that she told him about herself.
I met her first last Easter 12-month and lived with her from then until last Tuesday week. She was 22 then, fresh-looking and well-behaved, though she had been walking the streets for 3 years previous to that. She told me her maiden name was Marie Jeanette Kelly. She was born in Limerick. Her parents moved when she was a child to Wales, and they lived in Carmarthenshire. She was married when she was 16 to a collier, but I don't remember his name. He was killed in an explosion in the mines, and Marie went to Cardiff with her cousin, living as best she could. From there she went to France, but she only stayed a short time. Then she lived in a fashionable house in the West End, and then she came to the East End. She took lodgings in Pennington Street, and when she was there, a man named Morganstone lived with her. We used to live in Dorset Street, but we got thrown out from our lodgings because we got drunk and didn't pay the rent. We lived in Miller's Court until Marie let a woman sleep in the same room. When she came and stayed there, I left and took lodgings elsewhere. I used to come nearly every day and see her, and if I had any money, I gave her some. I stopped for about a quarter of an hour last Thursday. Told her I had no money. Marie never went in the streets when she lived with me, and she'd never have gone wrong again. And I should never have left her if it hadn't been for the bad woman stopping with her.
Any truth in that?
Well, it's hard to say. She was a cut above the rest of the women living in Dorset Street, but no relatives turned up. One of the papers did track down a woman that Kelly had worked for in Swansea, but they couldn't talk to her. She was waiting to come up for trial at the assizes as an abortionist.
So all this talk about going to France and living in a West End brothel was just romancing.
I reckon so. I reckon she went to Carmarthen, Swansea, Cardiff Dock area, East End. She was young, she was pretty. But she drank.
And she still sounded merry.
I heard her singing Friday night about 12:30. She was singing, I plucked a violet from my mother's grave. Rest her soul in heaven, poor dear. Rest her poor dear soul. She was a good, quiet and pleasant girl, as was liked by all of us. Oh, if only I'd known what was going to happen when I heard her singing that song. If it hadn't been for my Dave, he's my old man, you must know, I'd have walked out of that room and I'd have caught that white-livered villain. But my Dave said, you leave that woman alone, so I stayed where I was. Worse luck for the poor dear soul. Then I goes to bed, and I sleep so soundly that I doesn't get up till nigh on 7 in the morning. It was close on half an hour later that I wanted to go to market to buy my flowers. It was a chilly morning, with the rain falling steadily. Me poor shawl being as thin as a cobweb, the thought just struck me that I'd borrow Mary Jane's pelerine. So I knocks at her door, and I gets no answer. So I thinks to myself, she's sleeping, poor dear. I haven't got the heart to wake her. So I trudge through the wet in these here rags, as you see. And it wasn't till I gets back that I hears the dreadful news and sees her from my room across through the broken window, a sight I shall carry down to my grave.
The landlord thought so too. And he got near her.
As soon as Superintendent Arnold arrived, he gave instructions for the door to be burst open. I forced the door with a pickaxe and we entered the room. The sight we saw, I cannot drive away from my mind. It looked more like the work of the devil than a man. poor woman's body was lying on the bed undressed. She'd been completely disemboweled, and her entrails had been taken out and placed on the table. It was those I'd seen when I looked through the window and took to be lumps of flesh. The woman's nose had been cut off and her face was gashed and mutilated, so she was quite beyond recognition. Both her breasts had been cut away and placed by the side of her liver and other entrails on the table. I'd heard a great deal about the Whitechapel murders, but I declare to God, I never expected to see such a sight as this.
Just as well Barnaby and Burgo were spared it.
Who?
The landlord knew.
Inspector Aberlin arrived and gave instructions that no one should be allowed to enter or leave the court. The inspector waited a little while and then sent a telegram to Sir Charles Warren to bring the bloodhounds.
They didn't come, though.
Handsome beasts.
Two magnificent animals champion Barnaby and Burgo. Barnaby is better known on the show benches, but Burgo in body, feet and legs is as nearly perfect as possible.
Sounds like the Miss World contest.
Burgo is nearly 2 years younger than his kennel companion. He's black and tan and is a rare stamp of hound. Powerful, well-formed and exceedingly well-grown. His head measures 12 inches in length.
Any vital statistics for Sir Charles Warren?
Only that he held field trials in Hyde Park, with himself as the mechanical hound. In one of the longest courses, the hounds were checked at half the distance. Burgo ran back, but Barnaby, making a fresh cast forward, recovered the trail and ran the quarry home.
But he didn't bite him while he was at it. Might have put Sir Charles off the scent.
The dogs had been purchased by Sir C. Warren for the use of the police in the detection of crime should occasion arise.
Can you see Robert Mark chasing round Hyde Park with two bloodhounds after him?
I'd pay a lot of money for the chance.
And to read the papers afterwards.
Oh, the papers had a lovely time with Sir Charles, especially when they got hold of the story that the hounds had got lost on Tooting Common and an all-stations alert went out.
And that didn't stop him?
Oh, no. No, he issued instructions that in the event of another Jack the Ripper murder, his nasty policemen with their big feet were not to go anywhere near the scene of the crime until after the bloodhounds got there.
And that is why it was 2.5 hours before a single detective or a doctor got into the room where Kelly's body lay?
Exactly. They hung around till 1:30, and then Superintendent Arnold turned up with authority to enter the room.
With Barnaby and Burgo, presumably?
Oh, no, no. No, Sir Charles and the owner hadn't been able to agree on terms after all, so B&B were back in their kennels at Scarborough. Only nobody got around to telling Aberlin.
So he just waited?
Obeying instructions. And taking statements, I hope, because a lot of people had seen Mary Jane Kelly. People like the widow Cox.
I saw her on Thursday night about 11:45. She was drunk. There was a man with her, a short, stout man, shabbily dressed. He had a pot of ale in his hand. He had a longish coat on, dark it was, and a round billycock hat. I didn't notice his hair, but he had a blotchy face and a carroty moustache. I said good night to her. She was shutting the door of her room. She said, "Good night, I'm going to have a song." She started singing a violet I plucked from my mother's grave. I stayed in my room for 1/4 hour, and then I went out again. When I got back at 1 o'clock, she was still singing. I stayed in my room for a minute to warm my hands because it was raining, and then I went out again. She was still singing. I got back to my room at 3 o'clock. The light was out, and there was no noise.
Because by that time, Mary Jane Kelly was dead?
Killed by the man with the blotchy face and carroty moustache. Not as simple as that. Must have been weird. That little court. There's the widow Cox trudging up and down stairs all night, looking for a client. And in the room above Kelly's, there's another one. Elizabeth Prater.
I left my room about 5 o'clock. Got back about 1 in the morning. I stood at the corner till 1:20. No one spoke to me. My carfish shop was open and I called in. Then I went to my room. I should have seen a light in Kelly's room, but there wasn't none. Partition so thin I could have heard Kelly walk about in the room. I went to bed at 1:30, barricaded the door with 2 tables. I fell asleep directly. The kitten disturbed me about 3:30 or 4:15. As I was turning round, I heard a cry of murder in a faint voice. It seemed to come from the court.
Do you often hear cries of murder?
There's nothing unusual in the street. I didn't take particular notice.
Did you hear it again?
No. I went back to sleep. I woke up again about 5. I went downstairs and I saw some men harnessing horses. 5:45, I was in the 10 Bells.
At 5:45?
Well, they'd be open for the market.
Yeah, but she hadn't been humping sacks of potatoes around. What a world. Going to bed, barricading the door, hearing shouts of murder and just turning over in your sleep. And then at 6 o'clock, into the pub to get another day going.
Yeah, but what matters is that she said there was no light in Kelly's room. So Kelly was either dead by then, which means that the Ripper was our man with the carroty moustache and the blotchy face, or she'd got rid of him and gone downstairs again to look for another client.
Even at 1 in the morning?
Well, why not? There were no cocks in the parade. A woman was still touting for business. And Kelly was a damn sight younger and prettier than either of them, and she owed 30 shillings in rent, which was a lot of money.
So, do we enter carroty moustache?
I don't think so. But if you think the Ripper was after Kelly, then you should pay attention to her man, Joseph Barnett.
I've seen the body, and it is Mary Kelly. I could identify her by the ears and the eyes. I'm positive it is her. I last saw her alive between 7:30 and 8:15 on the night she's supposed to have been murdered. I called to see after her welfare and stayed there 1/4 hour.
Did you have any drink together there?
No, sir.
Was she quite sober?
Yes, sir.
Was she generally of sober habits?
I always found her so. But she had been drunk several times in my presence. I picked her up first in the Commercial Road one night, and we had a drink together. I made arrangements to see her the following day, which was a Saturday. We agreed to live together, and I took lodgings in a place in George Street, not far from where the George Yard murder was committed. I lived with her up to when I left her just recently.
Did you ever hear her say she was afraid of anyone?
Yes. She used to get me to bring her the evening papers and see if there was another murder.
Interesting.
Maybe. But they must all have been fairly twitchy by then. All the women on the streets, anyway. What's your view?
I'm on a different tack. A little matter of impeding the course of justice.
Ah.
Well, this was the 5th murder, all in less than 10 weeks. All obviously by a clever and dangerous criminal. So there was an inquest. But it wasn't the same coroner, remember. Instead of Win Baxter, the one who kept asking questions and shouting the odds, instead it's being conducted by another coroner on the grounds that the body is lying in his district. It is Dr. Roderick MacDonald, MP, who's in the chair now, and he's prepared to prove it.
What is the matter there?
I don't see why we should have this inquest thrown on our shoulders. The woman didn't die in this district. She died in Whitechapel.
Do you think we don't know what we are doing? Do you think we don't know our own district?
I am in the list for Shoreditch, and I don't know why I should be summoned about this. This affair happened in Whitechapel.
It happened within my district. I may tell you the jurisdiction lies where the body lies, not where the murder was committed. And the body lies in Shoreditch.
This is not my district. I come from Whitechapel. Mr. Baxter's my coroner.
You are summoned here and you must do your duty.
I object.
You have no right to object. I shall not argue with the jury. If any of the jurymen persist in objecting, I shall know how to deal with them. If any juryman has a distinct objection, let him say so. Does any juryman persist in objecting?
And then he took them all off to see the body.
I bet that shut them up.
And hurried things along. With the body of Mary Kelly on his hands, the 5th woman to be killed by the Ripper, Oh, what does Dr. MacDonald do? He calls just 2 witnesses, the widow Cox and the Prater woman. But then, Mrs. Caroline Maxwell, whose husband runs the lodging house across the street, turns up with her story.
You must be very careful about your evidence because it is different to other people's. You say you saw her standing at the corner of the entry to the court.
Yes, on Friday morning from 8 till past.
She's wrong. Can't have been Kelly. By that time, Kelly must have been dead.
You may think she was wrong, but she was certain she was right.
I fixed the time by my husband finishing his work. When I came out the lodging house, she was just opposite.
Did you speak to her?
Yes, well, it was so unusual to see her up. She was a young woman who didn't associate with anyone. I spoke to her. I said, "What brings you up so early, Mary?" And she said, "Oh, Carrie, I do feel so bad."
And yet you say you'd only spoken to her twice previously, but you knew her name and she knew yours.
Well, yes, with being about the lodging house.
What did she say?
She said, "I've had a glass of beer and brought it up again." And it was in the road. I imagined she'd been in the Britannia beer shop at the corner of the street. I went, saying I could pity her feelings, and went to Bishopsgate to get my husband his breakfast. On the way back, I saw her outside the Britannia talking to a man.
This would be at what time?
Between 8 and 9 o'clock. I was away about half an hour, so it will be about 8:45.
What description can you give of this man?
Oh, I couldn't give you none. They were some distance, but I'm sure it was the dead woman. I'm willing to swear to it.
You are sworn now. Was he a tall man?
No. He was a little taller than me, and stout.
What clothes was he wearing?
Dark clothes. He seemed to have a plaid jacket on, but I couldn't tell you what sort of an hat he had.
What sort of a dress had the deceased?
A dark skirt, a velvet body, a maroon shawl, and no hat.
Pretty startling evidence in the middle of an inquest.
And she stuck to her story.
So, according to her, Mary Kelly was killed after 9 o'clock in the morning.
Aye.
And at 11:15, Bowyer and McCarthy found her body in pieces all over the room.
Exactly. Which is why the medical evidence should be decisive. But listen to your old friend, Dr. Phillips.
At about 1:30 p.m., the door to the room was broken in by McCarthy under the direction of Superintendent Arnold. On the door being opened, it knocked against a table which was close to the left-hand side of the bedstead. The mutilated remains of a woman were lying 2/3 over towards the edge of the bedstead nearest the door. Deceased had only a linen undergarment upon her, and by subsequent examination, I am sure the body had been removed after the injury which caused death from that side of the bedstead which was nearest to the wooden partition. The large quantity of blood under the bedstead, the saturated condition of the palliasse, pillow, and sheet at the top corner of the bedstead nearest to the partition leads me to the conclusion that the severance of the right carotid artery, which was the immediate cause of death, was inflicted while the deceased was lying at the right-hand side of the bedstead and her head and neck in the top right-hand corner.
Well?
And that's it. The extent of the medical evidence at the inquest on Mary Jane Kelly. Nothing about the nature of the wounds to the body. Nothing about the time of death. Although they just heard a witness who contradicted all the others. Just the fact that the body had been moved on the bed and that she'd had her throat cut.
Which was the cause of death.
Yes, but that is not enough. The law requires more. That doctor was breaking the law and that coroner was letting him get away with it. Now listen to this. All the injuries of the body, also all wounds, ought to be viewed, and the length, breadth, and deepness, with what weapon and in what part of the body the wound or hurt is, and how many be culpable, and how many wounds there be, and who gave the wounds. All which things must be enrolled in the roll of the coroner. That is the law. It was the law at the time of Edward I when it was written, and it was the law in 1888 when that inquest set on Mary Jane Kelly.
Dr. Phillips tried to hold back at the inquest on Annie Chapman.
And that coroner wasn't having any, but not this one. He got rid of Dr. Phillips double quick, called Inspector Aberline to confirm what the doctor had said, and then wrapped it up for the jury. A neat job.
The question is whether you will adjourn for further evidence. My own opinion is that it is very unnecessary for two courts to deal with these cases and go through the same evidence time after time, which only causes expense and trouble. If the coroner's jury can come to a decision as to the cause of death, then that is all that they have to do. They have nothing to do with prosecuting a man and saying what amount of penalty he shall get. It is quite sufficient if they can find out what the cause of death was. It is for the police authorities to deal with a case and satisfy themselves as to any person who may be suspected later on. I do not want to take it out of your hands. It is for you to say whether you think it is a matter to be dealt with in the police courts later on, and that this woman, having met her death by the carotid artery having been cut, you will be satisfied to return a verdict to that effect. From what I learn, the police are content to take the future conduct of the case. It is for you to say whether you will close the inquiry today. If not, we shall adjourn for a week or fortnight to hear the evidence that you may desire.
That's Langan on the line, isn't it?
There's been times when you and I would have been grateful for a coroner that was that ready to shut up and let the police get on with it.
Oh, sure, but not without even bothering to establish time and manner of death.
We have sufficient evidence to reach a verdict.
What is the verdict?
Willful murder against some person or persons unknown.
And that's it, wrapped up. Everybody go home. Half a day to inquire into the latest and most sensational murder in a string of sensational murders. And a coroner who practically dares the jury to ask for a scrap more evidence.
You certainly make it sound suspicious.
That's not hindsight. A newspaper as respected as the Daily Telegraph sounded off about it at the time.
Much surprise is expressed that the inquest should have been closed before an opportunity was given to the relatives of the deceased to identify the body. As they are believed to reside in Ireland, there was some delay to be expected in finding them.
But there was no hanging about.
Well, perhaps they didn't want all the nasty details made public.
Oh, but they had been made public. I mean, look at this. On horror's head, horrors accumulate. And this, another horrible tragedy. And this, where is Sir Charles Warren?
So it's what? Official hushing up?
At least. Even a sort of conspiracy. Oh, the Daily Telegraph got very rough.
It is in the power of the Attorney General to apply to the High Court of Justice for a new inquest. If he is satisfied there has been rejection of evidence, irregularity of proceedings, or an insufficiency of inquiry. This course is improbable, as it is stated that Dr. Phillips, the Divisional Surgeon of Police, with whom the coroner consulted in private, had had a commission from the Home Office for some time, and he does not consider himself a free agent. But it is pointed out that by hurriedly closing the inquest, the opportunity was lost of putting on record statements made on oath and when the memory of the witnesses is fresh. It is not improbable that a long interval may elapse before a prisoner is charged at the police court.
That's a solid prophecy.
But remember the word. Hurriedly closing the inquest. Opportunity lost of statements taken on oath while the memory of the witness is fresh. Now, the inquest was over by the time Hutchinson came forward.
Last Thursday, I'd been to Romford in Essex. I got back on Friday morning after walking all the way, and as I passed Thrall Street, I saw a man standing on the corner of the street. Then, as I went towards Flower and Dean Street, I saw Kelly. Well, I knew her very well. I've been in her company a number of times. She said, "Mr. Hutchinson, can you lend me sixpence?" I said, "I can't, as I'm all spent out going down to Romford." She walked on towards Thrall Street, saying, "I must go and look for some money." The man who was standing on the corner of Thrall Street came towards her. He put his hand on her shoulder and he said something to her, which I didn't hear, and then they both burst out laughing. He put his hand on her shoulder again, and they both walked slowly towards me. As they came by me, his arm was still on her shoulder. He had a soft felt hat on, and this was drawn down somewhat over his eyes. I put my head down to look him in the face, and he turned and looked at me very sternly. Then they both walked over the road to Dorset Street. I followed them. They stood on the corner of Miller's Court for about 3 minutes. Kelly spoke to the man in a loud voice. She said, "I've lost my handkerchief." He pulled a red handkerchief out of his pocket and gave it to Kelly. And then they both went up the court together. I went to have a look up the court to see if I could see them, but I couldn't. I stood there for about 3/4 of an hour to see if they came down again, but they didn't. So I went away.
Sounds reasonable.
There's the ring of truth. He came forward in just the right sort of way. No rushing about trying to get his name in the papers. He only talked to reporters after he'd seen the police, and he only saw the police after one of his fellow lodgers told him to.
It's a plausible story. Strolling through the place that late, nothing to do, nowhere to go. Then suddenly you see a bird you've been with coming towards you and you think, here's a bit of luck. But she wants money and you haven't got any. Then you would take a keen interest in the fellow who does pick her up.
So let's get his description then.
Yeah.
He was about 5 feet 8 inches, 34, 35 years old. He had a dark complexion and a dark moustache turned up at the ends. He was wearing a long, dark coat, trimmed with astrakhan, a white collar and a black necktie. There was a horseshoe pin fixed in it. He had a pair of dark spats with light buttons over button boots, and there was a massive gold chain on his waistcoat. His watch chain had a big seal with a red stone hanging from it. He had dark eyes and bushy eyebrows. He had no side whiskers and his chin was clean shaven. He looked like a foreigner. He was carrying a small parcel in his hand of about 8 inches long. It had a strap around it. He was holding it tight in his left hand. It looked as though it were covered in dark American cloth. He had a pair of brown kid gloves in his right hand, the one he put on Kelly's shoulder. Kelly didn't seem to be drunk, but she was a little bit spreeish. One thing I noticed was he walked very soft.
One thing he noticed an awful lot, did Mr. Hutchinson.
Too much, do you think?
Oh, if a man's walking off with the bird you fancied, you do take a good hard look at him.
Then there's that parcel again. And the man P.C. Smith saw talking to Longley's Stride 20 minutes before she was killed was the same general colouring. And he was carrying a parcel.
The knife.
It's a good description, I believe him. So did Inspector Aberline, but we'll never know what showing he would have made at the inquest, because by the time he turned up, the inquest was over.
Now, the coroner wasn't to know that Hutchinson was going to turn up?
The coroner didn't give anybody a chance to turn up.
A bit odd.
More than a bit.
Oh, suppose they just wanted to avoid panic. Because there was panic, remember?
Down to a late hour last night, the utmost excitement, if not terror, pervaded all classes of the population in the East End. The Dorset Street murder, with all its revolting details, was the one topic of conversation. And as the closing hour of 12:30 approached, there was an obvious renewal of the panic that ensued on the occasion of the recent double murder in Whitechapel. As then, so now. The thoroughfares which constitute the main arteries of traffic in the East End were deserted shortly after 1 o'clock. A strange scene to those accustomed to the bustle and turmoil of the Whitechapel streets far into the early morn. Ere an hour had passed after midnight stroke, festive revellers had disappeared from the scene, while females of the unfortunate class were conspicuous by their absence. But peaceful though the appearance of the streets may have been, the sturdy burghers of the East End were not unmindful of the voluntary duties undertaken by them a few weeks back. The members of the Vigilance Committee were everywhere to be seen, peering into dark and shady nooks, while detectives in plain clothes and in overwhelming numbers were ever on the alert. But as the hours went by, the detectives, both amateur and professional, left the scene. And once again, the streets resounded only to the heavy mechanical tread of the blue-coated guardians of the night. Even the coffee stalls were deserted, and the sullenness that comes of despair is rapidly stealing into the face of many an East End distributor of the cup that is said to cheer, but not inebriate.
It's coming to something when people are too scared to go out for a cup of coffee.
You'd have thought the coppers would have kept the coffee stalls going.
Perhaps they didn't pay.
Still, panic and fear, which could have been made worse if Hutchinson's evidence had been made loudly public.
Why?
Well, Hutchinson didn't see some smelly Whitechapel slaughterman with a leather apron. He saw a toff, one of them.
What, for weeks there had been letters to the papers suggesting that the Ripper was a gentleman?
Not the same as suddenly finding out that he was.
So there could have been a riot?
Well, it was only a year since Sir Charles Warren had the lifeguard keeping the mob out of Trafalgar Square. Now, if this bit of news had been released, I mean, they wouldn't have had just a riot. They would have pulled up Nelson's column and thumped Sir Charles over the head with it.
They wouldn't have found him, remember?
It is now officially announced that Sir Charles Warren has tendered his resignation as Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, and that this has been accepted. Relations between Sir Charles and the Home Office have for some time been strained, but yesterday his books and papers were removed from the Commissioner's office, and this is the first intimation in Whitehall Place that he now relinquished the position.
And that's another thing. Oh, I know Sir Charles resigned because of a row with the government and not because the Whitechapel murders were not directly anywhere, but it's all very odd somehow. I mean, here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 murders, all in the space of 10 weeks. Head of CID on holiday in Switzerland. Chief Commissioner resigning or being chased by bloodhounds in Hyde Park.
You agree with the Queen?
You what?
The Queen fears that the detective department is not as efficient as it might be. No doubt the recent murders in Whitechapel were committed in circumstances which made detection very difficult. Still, the Queen thinks that every possible suggestion might be carefully examined and, if practicable, followed. Have the cattle boats and passenger boats been examined? Has any investigation been made as to the number of single men occupying rooms to themselves? The murderer's clothes must be saturated with blood and be kept somewhere. Is there sufficient surveillance at night? These are some of the questions that occur to the Queen on reading the accounts of this horrible crime.
Amateur. What do the professionals think? What about Abilene?
Well, nobody knows what Abilene thought, because nobody's discovered anything he wrote himself. But some of the others wrote books. Smith, the acting head of the city police, he did.
Yeah, well, at least he'd been trying.
There is no man living who knows as much of those murders as I do. And I must admit that though within 5 minutes of him one night, and with a very fair description of him besides, he completely beat me and every police officer in London, I've no more idea now where he lived than I had 20 years ago.
Well, that's honest anyway.
There's Dr. Robert Anderson, our old friend, the new head of CID.
Well, I expect he can tell us much, except what the weather's like in Switzerland.
One did not need to be a Sherlock Holmes to discover that the criminal was a sexual maniac of a virulent type, that he was living in the immediate vicinity of the scenes of the murders, and that if he was not living absolutely alone, his friends knew of his guilt and refused to give him to justice.
This man's a fool.
During my absence abroad, the police had made a house-to-house search for him, and the conclusion we came to was that he and his people were certain low-class Polish Jews. For it is a remarkable fact that people of that class in the East End will not give up one of their number to Gentile justice. The result proved that our diagnosis was right on every point. In saying that he was a Polish Jew, I am merely stating a definitely ascertained fact. My words are meant to specify race and not religion, for it would outrage all religious sentiment to talk of religion of a loathsome creature whose utterly unmentionable vice reduced him to a lower level than that of the brute. But I may say at once that undiscovered murderers are rare in London, and the Jack the Ripper crimes are not within that category. Scotland Yard can boast that not even the subordinate officers of the department will tell tales out of school, and it would ill become me to violate the unwritten rule of the service. Having regard to the interest attaching to this case, I am almost tempted to disclose the identity of the murderer, but no public benefit would result from such a course, and the traditions of my old department would suffer. I will merely add that the only person who had ever had a proper view of the murderer unhesitatingly identified the suspect the instant he was confronted with him. But he refused to give evidence against him.
And they made him head of CID.
That's all right. Smith didn't like him much either.
Sir Robert does not tell us how many of the murderer's people sheltered him. But whether there were 24 in number, or 200, or 2,000, he accuses them of being accessories to these crimes before and after their committal. Sir Robert says the Ripper could go and come and get rid of his bloodstains in secret. The criminal was valeted, no doubt, by his co-religionists, warned not to take too great risks, to come home as soon as he could after business, and always to give notice when he meant to cut up another lady. Sir Robert spent, so he tells us, the day of his return from abroad and half the following day in re-investigating the whole case. A more fruitless investigation, looking to all he tells us, it would be difficult to imagine.
Very funny. Doesn't get us very far. Though, what about Dewey? He was a DC then, the one who called Crippen.
I'd just been appointed to the CID and stationed in the Whitechapel division when the Jack the Ripper murders occurred. I was on the spot, actively engaged during the whole series of crimes. I ought to know something about it, but I have to confess that I'm as much mystified now as I was then by the man's amazing elusiveness.
This is no good. These are all for publication. I want the private stuff, the real feel of the gossip. What Barlow said to what Abilene and Inspector then said to his sergeant.
Well, there must be files. Witness statements, records of pocketbook entries, the sort of thing that you and me put on the files, even the files that we send up on high. Unless this was too long ago.
It's less than 100 years. People could write. Civil servants did keep files.
Then why are you waiting? Go to the files.
They're closed.
Open them.
Like a burglar.
Give over.
Well, I don't know how else.
Not true.
How then?
Well, stands to reason. Cabinet papers about the war, about Suez even, they're open.
Not the file on the Whitechapel murders.
Not open until when?
I've asked. Until 1993.
Closed. Even to you.
Are you challenging me?
Yes. Do you want me to say it?
All right. I'll say it, open sesame. It'll take some time.
That's plenty. I'll give you a whole week.